Today we'll be starting a series of animation exercises, and the idea behind this is that practice makes perfect. So we'll be doing one exercise per day, and hopefully by the end of these exercises we will see some amount of improvement. Now, what better way to do that than to do the 51 great animation exercises to master here on animatorisland.com. Now, the idea is not just to do the exercises, but once you're done, add your own spin to it. So for example, using this bouncing ball here, once you create your bouncing ball, you could turn the bouncing ball into a character, maybe add a face to it or add a background, do something to it, customize it and make it your own and have fun with it. Okay, but make sure that the foundation is there of the ball bouncing up and down. Now, before we get started, there's something that I want to tell you guys about, and that is the controller plugin is out here on GitHub. I'm going to provide the link in the description below so that you can go ahead and download it. Now, I've used this plugin in a few videos before. That was a plugin in its early stages, but now it's close to complete or complete. So you can just download it. The instructions are here on how to install it and how to use it, and of course you'll be seeing me use it, so you can also get an idea from there of how to use it. Now, I'm not sure if I'll use this in all of the 51 exercises, but I'm pretty sure that I'll be using it in some of them. Okay, so please go ahead and download that, install it, and follow along whenever you see me use the plugin. Now let's get started with the very first exercise. So here I am in Synfig, and remember we're doing a bouncing ball, so for that we will need a ball. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a ball like so. Let me zoom out here so that we can see that. And my ball is blue, but I'm going to change it to white so that we can have that contrast with the background. And it's feeling a little small, so I'm just going to go ahead and scale it up a bit, like maybe there. I'm just going to left click here and drag down a line just to have a ground plane so I can know where my ball will stop. And I'm going to add another line for where my ball will be going once it leaves the floor, because remember we're creating a bouncing ball here. So up, down, up, down, up, down. All right, now there are a million, well, maybe not a million, but there are a few ways that you could animate the ball here, right? You could animate the points, you could create a folder and animate that. There are tons of ways, but I'm just going to use whatever way I feel comfortable with, and it will change within each exercise, but how you decide to animate is up to you. One thing though is that I'm going to try my best to use constant keyframes, because I don't want to have full assistance from Synfig here, because remember that these keyframes, some of these keyframes does assist us by adding in between frames. So I'm going to try and avoid that until I really need them. So that said, I'm going to go ahead and create a folder for this here, and I'm going to select both the group layer and the drawing layer here, or the circle layer, and I'm going to just move the origin point all the way down to the base of the circle here. Now you might be asking yourself, why did I do that? Well, I will show you. Let me zoom out here and move my ball down here to the ground plane like so. And the reason why I did this is, remember that this is a bouncing ball, and we'll need to part of these exercises is so that we can also practice our principles. And when the ball is bouncing, it will squash and it will stretch. Now when the ball is squashing, if I should select this and squash it down, notice how it goes from the top to the bottom. But if the origin point was here and I squashed it, the base of the ball would lift up from the floor, and I don't want that. Now you could do it this way, but then you would have to move it down to the floor whenever you need it to be on the floor. But to save me the hassle, I'm just going to move the origin point down here to the base. So that is the reason why. So now that I have my ball all set up, I'm going to be using the controller plugin. And so the controller plugin allows me to create controllers for my actions so that I can have a controller to just easily change from one pose to another pose. The main controller that I'll be using is the slider controller, and I'll demonstrate how we can use that. And remember to read the instructions on the GitHub page here so that you too can learn how to use it and not just watch me use it. Okay, so I'm going to turn on Animate here, and to use the plugin, you'll of course have to save your project first, or else you get a warning message. So let me just go ahead and file, save as. I'm gonna overwrite this exercise here, click on replace. We need some poses to store inside of the plugin. So here on the very first frame here, I'm just going to add a keyframe. Let me first decide what pose I want. So I think I'm going to create the up down motion pose first, right? So here on frame 0, I'm just going to select the origin point here, move it down slightly to add a keyframe, and then move it back up to its original pose there, or its original state there. Go to the second frame here, and I'm just going to move this all the way up there, like so, till it hits the top of that line. Yeah, so if I go back and forth, we can see that we have 2 poses here. So to see this plugin in action, I'm just going to select the name of my layer here. I'm going to erase that, and I'm going to type slider, SLIDER underscore, and I'm going to name this move, because the ball is moving. So I'm going to call this move, press enter. So to create a slider, you first need to type slider underscore and then give the slider a name. Okay, then go to plugin and click on create joystick, and again just read the documentation on GitHub so that you can know how to use this. So I'm going to click on joystick, create joystick, proceed, and it will go ahead and create my slider there. So let me zoom out, and let me just move this out of the way here, and I'm just going to test this by clicking on this control point here and moving it over, and then we can see that it moves up when I move over to the right, and when I move left, it moves over to the left. So what it did was it took the 2 keyframes and just assigned this controller to those 2 keyframes. So whenever I move it to the left, it performs the action on the first keyframe, and when I move it to the right, it performs the action on the second keyframe. Okay, now you can create as many keyframes as you want, but just note that each keyframe that you create will have a slider of its own. So this is good enough for me. Now I'm just going to create 2 more sliders, one for the squash and one for the stretch. Now you could create one slider that activate both the squash and the stretch, but I'm going to create 2 separate sliders just to keep them separate, right? But just note that you could create one slider that does both actions. All right, so let me just turn on animate here, go to my very first frame here, and I'm just going to move this down a bit to add a keyframe, and then move it back up in place there. And I'm going to go to my second frame here, and I'm going to go down by 3 increments. So I think that's 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to move out here 1, 2, 3. So if I go back and forth, we can see that we have a squash going on there, a squash motion there. Now that my pose is done, I'm just going to come over here to the folder of the ball, and I'm going to type SLIDER underscore, and I'm going to call this squash. Enter. And I'm going to run that plugin again, proceed, and it created my squash slider here. And let me go ahead and test that out. So if I move this over to the right, it squashes, and if I move it over back to the left, it goes back to the original state. Okay, so that's good. Now I'm just going to go ahead and create one for my stretch. So with the animate button turned on here, I am going to select this point here, move it up slightly, move it back down to add a keyframe, move it over to the second keyframe, the second frame here. I'm just going to go up by 3 increments, 1, 2, 3. Now you don't have to go up by 3 increments, okay? Just make sure that the squash is something that you are comfortable with, okay? I just decided to use 3 for some reason. Let me just move this in, 1, 2, and let me run this back to see how it looks. And I'm thinking that I can exaggerate this a bit more, so let me just move this up a bit more so that we can have a greater amount of stretch. So that is looking fine to me. And let me just go ahead over here, slider underscore stretch, enter, and plugins, create joystick, proceed, and I have my joystick created there, or my slider created there. Let me test it out by going over there, Okay, so now we have 3 different sliders that does 3 different things. So we are all set up here. Now it's time to animate. Now remember what I said previously, that I don't want to get too much assistance from Synfig here. So I'm going to be using the constant keyframe. So I'm just going to select the constant keyframe there. And let's set up our scene here. Now I don't want the animation to go all the way out to frame 120. I think we can stop on frame 24. So I'm just going to change this here to 24, enter. And let me plan this out for a second here. So maybe on frame 0, the ball is at the top here, and then on frame 12, which is half of that 24, it goes to the ground, and then on frame 24, it goes back up. So yeah, I think that's how I'm going to do it. So I'm going to turn on animate here, go to my very first frame, go to the move slider here, and I'm just going to move this over to the right so that we start at the top there. And I'm going to come all the way down to frame 12 here, and then move the slider over. So now we have up, down, and we need to get the up motion again. Now we can do this one of 2 ways. We could just duplicate this keyframe because of course the ball is up here, and we could just copy it down here, or we could just come down to frame 24 and just move our slider over again so that we have the up, down, up motion going on. So let me just turn on the loop button here by clicking this section right here and just play so that we can see what's going on. Okay, so we have the foundation laid out, up, down, up, down. So I'm going to be animating this ball on 2s. What that means is that one pose will last for 2 frames before it changes. So let me demonstrate that. So on frame 0, the ball is right there. And on frame 1, the ball would still be right there because now that is 2 frames, and then it would change on the very 3rd frame here. So I'm just going to start here. Now we already have the ball going up and down, but we need to add some in-between movements here. So I'm going to try and simulate a ease in, ease out for the ball, ease out for the ball because it's easing out. I want it to slowly start and then speeds up and then hits the ground. So I'm just going to move this slightly like so. Okay, that's probably too far. Let me move it back a bit like this. You can also type in the values down here in the offset. Okay, that is fine to me. Let me go back and forth and see. Okay, that is okay to me. And I'm going to move 2 frames down. And I'm going to move it again slightly forward. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So it moves there. I think I'm going to come down a bit more. So it goes there, there, there. Okay. All right. And I'm going to come 2 frames down here. Let me zoom out here and work on the other frames here. So I'm going to move this down like maybe somewhere there, and then come 2 frames down and then move it further down. Right. Remember what we're creating. We're creating the ball movement going all the way down. So 2 frames down and then move it a bit further here. And then here it hits the ground. So now that we have those keyframes, remember that the ball is basically doing the same movement over here. So what we can do is we can just duplicate these keyframes and put them over this side. Now it's easy to get mixed up on which keyframe goes where. All right, so let me just move my guide here so that we know that this keyframe goes here. Then let me move it there. All right, so it's easier to know which keyframe we need to duplicate. And move this here, and then this one, move it here. So let me play that back. Let's see what we have. Okay. Now that is looking okay to me. I mean, we could go in and alter this a bit more to make it look even better. But I think I'm liking that. I'm even liking the bit of hang time here at the top where it stays a little before it goes down. So I like that. So you can go and add some in-between frames here if you would like, but I'm liking the way this looks, so I'm going to leave it as is. So now that we have our up and down movement going on there, I am going to add my squash and my stretch. So we can decide which one we want to add first, and I think I'm going to add this stretch first. So let me just click on the stretch slider here, and let me go to frame 0 here, and let me just move the origin point here, just add a keyframe, and let me just move it back here. And let me see here. I'm going to go, remember we're animating on 2, so 1, 2, And I'm not going to just stretch the ball like this, because remember, because we're working with these sliders, if I should go back and forth, it looks like the ball has jumped up a bit, right? So we don't want that harsh movement there. So I'm just going to turn it on a bit like so. Let me see what that looks like. So it gradually stretches. So we have that, then 1, 2, 3. Then I'm going to move it out a bit more. Then go back to see how that looks. All right, maybe we could add a bit more of a stretch to it. Okay, so that is looking fine. And then 1, 2, and I think I'm going to go all the way there. So we have that movement going on. So it comes down, boom, and it hits the ground. And when it hits the ground, of course, it will go back to normal, because this is where the stretch, the squash would happen. And I'm just going to duplicate these keyframes here, because they're pretty much the same keyframes coming down. I'm just going to come over here. So 1, 2, 3, add that keyframe there, and duplicate this keyframe there. All right, so this is what we have now. And that is looking really good to me. Okay, so we still need to finish our stretches over here, because remember, when the ball goes up, it also stretches. And again, we can just duplicate our keyframes. So let me just move my my line here. You know, I really don't know what this line is called. We'll just call it the timeline line. I know that's probably too many words, but yeah. So let me just duplicate this here, move this here, duplicate this, and then move it to frame 4 here, duplicate that one, and we'll duplicate this one as well. And we'll duplicate this one here all the way over here. So let's take a look at that. All right, so we have a nice stretch going on when the ball comes down. So now that we have that, we need to go ahead and work on our squashes. So let me move down here. So when the ball lands here, this is where our squash begins. So I'm going to come back 2 frames here, and then go to my squash slider here. And what I want to do is just to activate it. So I'm just going to move it slightly to add a keyframe. Let me move this back over there. Okay. And then come down 2 frames here to where our stretch ends, and just move this over. So now we have that and that. And that is looking really good to me. And of course, we'll have to turn off the squash when it gets up off the ground. So let me come 2 frames over here and just turn it off. And because our stretch is already on, we'll see the ball stretching there. So we have that going on there. Bam, 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 bam. Hits the ground, moves up. Okay, so let me play that back. Yeah, and that is looking really good to me. And remember, you could go in between, add some in-betweens, and make it look even smoother. But I like this. Now, remember, when you've reached this stage and you're pleased with what you create, make sure you go over it, correct any mistakes that you've made, and then you add your own twist to it. Remember, you could add a face, you could change the color, turn it into a different type of ball. Whatever you decide to do is up to you. Now check the animation frame by frame again, just to make sure that all my frames are okay, because you know, sometimes we do make mistakes and we don't realize. So let me just move frame by frame here. And okay, wait. All right, so we can see that there's an issue here where the ball is supposed to be going up, but on this frame it moves down. Now we could just erase this and duplicate whatever frame is over here that corresponds with the frame over here, or we could just adjust it using our sliders here. Whichever way is just fine, but I don't know where we went wrong, because we did duplicate these frames over here over to this side. So I'm not sure how that happened. So let me just reduplicate these 3 here just to make sure. I'm getting all paranoid here, but I'm going to duplicate that one, then duplicate this one, and then duplicate this one. And let's see what we have here. Okay, so now it's fine. And that is looking great. Now, another thing that we could consider is that now we are working with 24 frames here. And the frame 0 is the same as frame 24. So remember, it's supposed to loop back, even though I didn't adjust it. Let me see here, frame 0, frame 24. Let me actually just turn this off here. Okay, so that we get the same keyframes there. So yes, once you're done, your frame 0 is supposed to be the same as frame 24 because we're trying to get this to loop. Now, because it is the same and it will loop, when it goes to frame 24, that is, the ball will be here. And then when it goes back to, when it's looping and it goes back to frame 0, the ball is in the same location. But remember, we're animating on 2. So when it goes here, the ball is still in the same location. So it actually stays for 3 whole frames. And we want it to last for 2 frames. Although it does look good, right? Because, you know, it stays for a while there and gives us a bit more hang time. So we could leave it at that, or we could just change this to 23 frames. So it will loop at the 23rd frame, go back to the original and then loop again. So that you would have this right here. And it doesn't look that much different, but you could do that. But I'm gonna change it back to 24 because I'm liking the way that looks. Sometimes we'll have to make these sacrifices, go for what looks good and what feels right versus, you know, what is actually accurate. And I'm talking strictly in the context of the animation right here, okay? All right, so that is looking good. One more thing that you could do if you animated using the constant keyframes as I did here, you could actually change them back to ease in, ease out. So what that would do is add in-betweens between our frames here. So you could technically still cheat, and I'll just show you what that looks like here. So let me just group all of these inside of a group. Well, the animations on the sliders here. So I'll just group those, and we could just right click and change all of these to ease in, ease out. So if I should just go like this, we can see that it fills in all the gaps. All right, but of course, we'd still have to do a bit of editing because there are some changes there when it fills in the gap, such as this right here. Remember, we want the squash to come here. So it will just take a bit of adjustment here. And what we could adjust here is actually, let me see here. When it goes here, we could just go to the, what's this one? The stretch, and just make sure that it's still stretching at this point. So we could just adjust that. Let me make sure that this changes to the ease in, ease out. So it stretches, still stretches. And let me turn off the squash there as well. And then when it hits, and before it goes back up like that, we don't want it to bounce up like that because we want want it to be stretching. So we could just change the stretch here and turn off the squash there. Okay, so just a bit of adjustment if you decide to add your ease in, ease out, and there we have a much smoother animation. So you can do that if you so choose. And this is my result. Now, when you're done, export your animation as a GIF and post it to the Synfig forums. Now, I'm going to be providing a link to that particular section of the forum in the description below. So please read the description. And this is the section on the forum. All right. So each day, whenever you finish an exercise, you just post your result, and it's an exercise per day. So don't go posting all of your results all at once if you decide to do like 10 different exercises on one day, right? The idea is that you will pace yourself, and we'll complete one of the exercises each and every day. And you can, if you do multiple variations of one exercise, as you see I did here before I got to my final result here, you can post those as well and maybe give a little explanation of what your thoughts were while you were creating it. All right, so that's it for this video, and I will see you in the next one.